Hello everyone, today we're going to be working on a painting of a deer with antlers. And as you can see, I've already got a quick gestural line drawing on the page, and I created that one using Prussian blue watercolour pen. And I do these kind of sketches quite often actually, because they're really quick to do, and you haven't invested very much time, so if they go wrong it's no big deal. But if they go right, then you end up with something that perhaps you want to keep as a finished article. And if not, then you can, work over the top of them with paint or marker pen, whatever you like. So this is actually going to be a mixed media painting. And so what I'm doing here is using a different watercolour marker. This one's obviously green. And I've just put in a little indication of some grass. And having done that, I'm now spraying the watercolour again with water, and I'm dragging a clean brush through that and just moving that paint around a little bit on the paper. The paper I'm using is A2 Daler-Rowney mixed media paper, and if you've seen some of my previous videos you know that I use this quite a lot. It's one of my favourite papers at the moment. So the idea with this painting is to really create a sense of light and background using the watercolour markers and keeping those colours reasonably subdued with quite soft edges. And then when I come to work on the animal, that will have much bolder colours. And as you can see, I'm currently adding some more watercolour with the watercolour pens. This time I'm putting an orange down. And once again, having wetted the surface of the painting, I'm simply dragging that same brush back and forth through those patches of colour. And as you can see, I'm even doing that on the original drawing, starting to move the blue around as well. So that obviously introduces some blue above the deer, but in addition it mixes in a little bit with some of the other colours that I put down. So you get it's a really quick way of introducing several colours and lots of blending, soft edges. Next up, I'm adding some purple. Now in this case, I am being a little bit more careful in terms of selecting where the colour goes. And the reason I've chosen to put the purple in those two areas is that that's where the light is catching the deer most dramatically. So the brightest parts of the deer are next to those purple areas. So I'm making the background there darker than the rest to help give us a stronger sense of contrast to those areas. And hopefully that will become more apparent when I get further into the painting. So I'm still working with the same brush. It's 1 inch wide, synthetic, flat brush. I haven't cleaned the brush at all since we started the video. So soft bristles, just really easy to move across the page. And what I'm doing now is popping in some more patches of orange. And these are meant to suggest some foliage, perhaps up in a tree in the top left there, and perhaps some fallen leaves down on the ground. And in this case, I'm again using the same brush. I'm teasing out the edges of those patches of colour. But whereas before I was moving the brush up and down vertically, this time I'm going in all different directions to help suggest some kind of just variation on the ground, really. So I've changed brushes now. I've switched to a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I've picked up some purple on that brush, and I'm using the Atelier interactive acrylics. And although these paints are designed to be reactivated, in other words, if you let them dry and then spray them with water, you can reactivate them and they're easy to blend, which isn't the way conventional acrylics work. I'm not actually planning to use that feature in this painting in particular. But I still like to use these paints over conventional acrylics quite often because they do stay open for a little bit longer. And of course, should I need to reactivate them, then I can. So even though I'm not planning to, it's good to have that safety net. So the purple here I've created with a mix of magenta and ultramarine blue. And the deer itself, of course, isn't really purple in colour, but when I was looking at the reference I had, which, by the way, normally I work from my own photographs or my own video footage, but I was a little bit short of deer photos. And the other week I had to do an artist demonstration for Exeter Art Society. So I Googled royalty-free reference photos, and I came up with a website, or came across a website called Pixabay, Pixabay. And it's really cool. You can just type in whatever subject you're looking for, and then there's a selection of photographs you can use for reference, completely royalty-free. And the only thing they say is, you have to create a free account, which just requires an email address. And if at some point you choose to add your own photos to share with others, royalty-free, then the site becomes advertisement-free for you. So it's a really great resource for artists. It's pretty cool. So this line sketch that was there at the start of the video, I actually created that as the start of my demonstration at Exeter Art Society. As one of the warm-up sketches that I typically do, just to sort of get the artistic muscles flexing before I move on to the main work for the evening. Anyway, so as I was saying about this purple, the deer itself isn't really purple in colour, but when I was looking at the reference, the shadowy regions had a sense of purple to them. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my reference photo as I'm painting, and I'm making a decision, basically, is this part of the deer in shadow or is it in light? And I'm being sort of very strict about that. It's either a yes or no at this stage. And so if it is in shadow, I'm putting the purple in, and if it's not, I'm leaving it untouched. And I'm currently using that same purple, but with a dry brush technique, to begin to suggest the presence of a cast shadow on the ground, so that we're beginning to give a sense of the deer standing on a solid platform. Now what I'm doing is exactly the same as I did with the shadow areas, but I'm saying, okay, if it's not in shadow, it must be in light. But I'm probably going to leave the very brightest areas, but I will start to pop in some kind of middle highlights, if you like. So this colour has been created using a combination of titanium white, cadmium yellow, and magenta. So, in other words, it's quite a bright, pale, yellowy orange. Now, one might be tempted to, having defined the shadows on the deer, to simply colour in the remaining white patches with this lighter colour, but I haven't done that. I'm sort of following the contours of the animal's side when I applied that yellow, and what I'm doing now is I've added more titanium white to that same mix, and I'm picking out the even lighter highlights. But notice that I'm giving a slight side sweep with the bristles as I paint in the legs, just to help create an illusion of 3 dimensions. The other thing is that by keeping your brush strokes quite loose and gestural, and not too careful, not too fussy, it helps to create a sense of movement within the drawing or the painting. So I always hope to give the impression that even if my colours end up being quite unrealistic and non-photographic, I hope that the structure of the drawing that I've put down, combined with the quality of the brush strokes, gives a sense that this animal, this drawing could sort of move in a minute. That's what I'm hoping to achieve anyway. But the other thing you can hopefully see is that, notice how the bolder colours that I'm putting down on the deer are contrasting with the rather softer marks that I used for the background. And so, although an environment for the deer to occupy is being created, hopefully your focus will be on the animal, and the animal will stand out from the background. So I've added some more magenta to the original pale orange now, and I'm going back in and working on some more mid-tone areas. So that's a slightly more realistic colour. This colour is closer to the colour of the hide of the animal in the reference photo. A little bit of dry brush now, overlaying the first layer of purple. So this is the equivalent for me of a cross-hatching technique you might see people do with a pencil or a biro, where you do a series of diagonal lines in one direction and then you go over them again with a series of diagonal lines in another direction. You can build up areas of tone. And I like to use that technique with a brush where I drag very lightly one colour over the top of another, and that gives you some nice mixing of tone and hues as well. So you see me diving off camera there down to the floor. What I've done is I've actually set my laptop that's displaying the photo down low, so I'm just adjusting that, zooming in or zooming out or something. Moving up to the antlers now, I'm using that same orange colour to pick out little sections, just where the light is catching and creating a certain colour. So I'm probably mixing some paint now. I think I thought I'd taken out most of the pauses in the video when there was not much action, but actually that little pause there when nothing was happening is quite representative of how I paint. So having worked on the animal for a bit, I will take a minute or two and just step back, look at things, consider how it's going, and how little do I need to do to bring this painting to a conclusion. Which perhaps sounds kind of lazy, but it's more about trying to be efficient, I hope. So what I'm doing now is I've taken a mixture of the ultramarine blue and titanium white, and there are some areas of pale skin and fur on this deer, and when they're in shadow, although they're probably close to being white in reality, when they are in shadow they look a pale blue, and those are the areas I'm picking out now. And then there are sort of these lozenge-shaped dots across the back and the hind quarters of the deer. And so I'm using that same blue to begin to indicate those. But I'm not trying to put down every single dot that the animal actually has, just picking out a few. And I was quite careful about how I orientated those dots on the surface of the animal. So I've tried to help create a sense of 3 dimensions by angling the dots at the appropriate angle as they move over the hip and hind quarters of the deer. And now currently continuing with that same colour down on the legs, just picking out highlighted areas. So my brush is now loaded with pure titanium white. So I'm now just putting on little touches where things are at their absolute brightest. And again, even though the movements are quite quick, the direction of the brush stroke is quite deliberate. So for example, on that hind leg I just did, I went from right to left rather than from top to bottom. And using the white again, just pop in a couple of little touches on the antlers where the light is really catching. And now, I want this painting to have a loose feel, and obviously the colours aren't going to be completely realistic at all. But at the same time, I feel the structure of the head needs to be a little more refined to make the animal more convincing. Now I've taken some of the purple that I used earlier on in the painting and put that back onto the larger brush that I was using. And I'm using the dry brush technique and just applying things very lightly to extend the shadowy region on the ground there, and also introduce some more shadowy blades of grass and things. And the reason I'm doing that is I rather felt that the animal, because there was that white central patch above the orange but in between the two bits of green, I felt that the animal was kind of floating a little bit off the ground on that white patch. And so by introducing this purple, hopefully it creates the illusion that he's standing on the ground, he's on a solid surface, and he's not going to go anywhere. So I personally feel that this particular deer, in this captured in this moment, he has wonderful poise. You know, he's really standing upright but without any sense of effort. He's looking around. You know, perhaps he's about to, forage or run off. But I feel that there's a real upward direction to what's going on with the animal. And in order for that to be convincing, I feel he needed to stand on something solid so that his feet are planted, but he's going up. So I think yes, it's just pure ultramarine blue now on my brush. And I use that to pop in a couple of little shadow areas on the antlers. And I'm also adding shadow areas on the eye as well. So the way I typically deal with the eyes for animals is I try to take as simple an approach as possible. So I'll block in the rough shape of the area of shadow which typically surrounds the eyes. And then I will refine the shape by putting a lighter colour and just trimming the edges of that dark area. And then I'll put in other details like the highlights in the eye and things. And you'll see that in a few minutes, hopefully. Now what I'm doing here is picking out areas of very deep shadow on the animal's body. And it's also allowing me to do just a little bit of drawing as well. So, it started off with a loose drawing, added some impressionist style paintwork over the top, and now I'm just putting in just a little bit of drawing here and there. Not being too heavy-handed about it, hopefully, but just to give things just a little bit more structure here and there. So throughout the process I've been using a flat brush all the way through, as you can see, but now I've switched to a small round brush. So, and as you just saw, I often, just to ensure I've got exactly the same colour, I pick up a little bit of paint off the other larger brush that I was using previously. So I'm just working on the eyes now and the nose. And I'll often take the same approach with the tip of the nose if it's a cow or a sheep or a deer. I'll block in a dark area in the approximate shape of the snout, and then I will pick out highlights around where the edge of the nostril would be, or across the top of the snout. And I find that's a really efficient way of describing what's going on. It might be perhaps more tempting to draw the outline of a nostril, colour that in dark, and then go around the outside with a lighter colour. But I personally prefer, as I say, to do a block of a dark colour and then think to myself, okay, if I just pick out that highlight and that highlight, is that enough to describe what's going on? But it very much depends on the type of art you're trying to do. I've seen many incredible artists. They say start in the top right hand corner of their painting, and they bring that up to completion straight away, and the rest of the canvas is pretty much untouched. And then they move down a section and do the same again and the same again. So you end up with a complete painting coming to life, moving from the top right hand corner down to the bottom left. I personally prefer to work in a different way, where hopefully I put down something everywhere and then I refine something everywhere again, and then gradually I do less on most of the painting, and the area I'm refining becomes smaller and smaller, And I personally find that's an efficient way to create a sense of focus in the work. But also, it saves me time, and also you can create effects, and you can see the different balance, how one part of the painting is balanced relative to another more easily. At least that's what I find anyway. So coming in with some pure white again, and this is what I mentioned earlier on a few minutes ago, just refining the shape of the eye now. So I try to keep things as loose as I can for as long as I can, but I will refine a few details here and there just to bring things into focus. So my thinking now is basically the face and the head of the animal is the area of main focus. The area of secondary focus is the rest of the deer, and then the area of least importance is the background. Now I'm picking out further highlights on the deer, again going back to those little spots, those little lozenge-shaped, I'm sure there's a proper technical name for them, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. And I'm picking out the ones in white now. And again, notice how the ones along the back I've angled to help give a sense that the back is, the top of the back is horizontal and going off, curving away from us. And then on the top of the tail here, similar technique. I'm thinking about the direction of the tail and the shape of those dots, of those little patches of light. So by working with different levels of tone, I used the pale blue for the dots earlier, and now I'm using pure white. And that variation in tone to describe essentially the same thing, helps to give the painting character. And although, again, my colours are unrealistic, hopefully there's a certain sort of stretched reality here in that if the deer really was this colour and light was falling on it, then some of those dots would be darker and some would be lighter. So further adjustments to the eyes. And just a little adjustment to the shape of the forehead on the deer there. So painting animals, when you come to the faces, it's pretty similar to painting human portraits, especially if you're working on this scale. So the head, it's quite small. I don't know exactly, but maybe 2 inches by 2 inches, something like that. So if you're working on an eye, whether it's a person or an animal, if you get the brush stroke slightly wrong in the corner of one eye, you can change the expression on the face quite dramatically. So it can go from looking fierce to startled to calm, all within the fraction of a millimetre. So, it's worth sort of just being a little bit careful. So putting some highlights in on the nose now. I think we're close to being done. So I'm just going to adjust the easel to give you a little bit of a better look. And then what I'll do is I'll pop up on screen the high resolution version. There you go, there's the high res version, photographed outside, so much truer to the colours of the actual painting. So hopefully you can see how I've incorporated weird colours with this deer. So I hope you really enjoyed this one. Please remember to like the video, subscribe and hit the notifications bell. And I hope to see you next week for the next episode. Thanks very much for watching.